right, so another masculinity thing. Except mine is going to be shorter and not funny. Okay, so I was at a cafe in Ubud in Bali with the type of people you would be at a cafe in Ubud in Bali with. So I was with an English entrepreneur, a feminist who had just shaved her head in protest of women's restrictive standards of beauty, and a guru named Hart, who did not speak. And David was trying to get me to get my shit together, and he said, "You've just got to have the balls for it, man. You just got to have the balls." Actually, Charlotte says, the balls are actually not really that strong. It's the pussy. The pussy is powerful. The pussy can take a beating, and the pussy can give birth. The balls will go down with a flick. Funnier than I thought it. And we all just nodded like wise feminists, and yes, of course, the pussy is powerful. It's the perfect metaphor for the rising feminine in the modern world. And of course, balls of steel was always a lie, right? Balls are not of steel. And a great metaphor, too, for that lie. But Hart slowly raised his hand. He hadn't spoken up to this point. He raised his hand and said, "I'd like to speak up for balls." They are courageous in their vulnerability. This is a pretty clever story. This is how I usually start my talks, because I give talks about masculinity. Very sincere talks about masculinity. And I start by talking about how masculinity is a performance. And I think we've had some wonderful performances about how much masculinity is a performance tonight. So I'll just talk about it instead of performing it. But I would usually start my talks by referring to when I was in summer camp, when I was like 7 years old. And I was sitting with my legs crossed at the knee, like this. And an older boy said, "Oh no, you can't do that. You have to have your legs crossed like this, the ankle. It's very important." This was like the most important thing he could possibly tell me. And I said, "Well, what is it if I do it like this?" And he said, "Well, then people will think you're like Andrew." So, what's like Andrew? Andrew's gay. I didn't know what gay was. I didn't know what sex was. But I learned at that point that gay was the thing that you most needed to not be. And not knowing what sex was, all gay really was like a girl. So this was my first experience of understanding that masculinity had to be performed. You had to not be a woman to be a man. So this is how I start my talks. And then I say things like boys don't cry and man up, rub some dirt on it. That's a horrible expression. I quote bell hooks. And then the second half of the talk, I talk about how the good man, this modern idea of the good man, the army of good men who will take over the bad men of the world, that this is a performance too. This sensitive new age guy, that's a performance. This spiritual bypassing. Does anyone know what spiritual bypassing means? It's a Bay Area crowd. We do a lot of that here. Spiritual bypassing is when we try to circumvent our murky underbelly by being transcendent. It does not work. It is bad wokeness. So that's a performance too. And so then I round the whole thing out by talking about this idea of an integrated, healthy, mature masculine identity, and it's non-universal. You can be what you want. But the key is that you must lead with vulnerability. Vulnerability is the mature masculinity. Here's the thing about that. When I give a talk about vulnerability as leadership, I'm performing vulnerability. So that's not vulnerability, right? I learned how to perform vulnerability. I'm actually really, really good at it. When I was 17 years old, I got sent to what is called a therapeutic boarding school. Does anyone know what this is? Did anyone have any kids in their class who got like sent away? And they were just gone for like ever? So it's a therapeutic boarding school is a place that you go where they kind of like reprogram you to be sensitive and loving and kind because you did too many drugs. It did not stop me doing drugs. But I was there for 2 years, and the way the school was set up is that you were rewarded for divulging emotion. So we had 3 hours of group therapy 3 times a week, and the program was such that if you could cry, you kind of won. you would get rewards for showing vulnerability. And not directly, it's not like you would be like, my daddy didn't like me, and they'd be like, okay, well now you get to not do dishes anymore. But it was progress in the program, and progress was showing vulnerability. I once read a proposal for a study, I don't know if they ever did the study, about therapeutic boarding schools. And it said that at therapeutic boarding schools, men learned traditionally feminine skill sets, but then they would use them for traditionally masculine goals. And I was like, oh, fuck, I do that. I have all this like emotional literacy and vulnerability, and then I just alpha male with it. I do, I'm doing it right now. And why do I do it? For this. For validation, for applause. For people who are nodding right now and saying, ooh, they're lies. That's why I do it. How many people here really, really love validation? Yeah, like everybody. Because it's great. Because it feels so good. I have a very dear mentor who once told me that living for external validation is like eating popcorn all day. And at the end of the day, you are full, you are hungry, and you are disgusting. And that's true. Because when you make a mask for people to fall in love with, then they'll fall in love with your mask. And if you are desperately trying to be worthy to be loved, no one will love your worthlessness. And that feeling of worthlessness is yours alone, and you get to live there and be in that space. So it turns out I don't really like actual vulnerability. It's extremely uncomfortable. I have like a feeling that's like in my stomach, and it's sort of heavy, and it's kind of like smoke, but it's kind of like oily, and I want to defend it. And if you get near it, I'm like a gunslinger, and I'm gonna fucking kill you. And that's a weird feeling when your job is to perform vulnerability. So I perform the performance of openness instead of vulnerability. And for me, when vulnerability comes up, it's like, so like vulnerability is like a cute little mouse. And it's like really sweet, and I really like it, and it's like in a field. And then my cloying need for external validation is like this vicious hawk. And as soon as I feel like these stirrings of like, I'm being real, it's happening, it's like, and I'm tracking everybody's response to me. And I'm just kind of, did it land? Do you like me? Am I okay? Am I going to forget my lines? Am I ready? And this audience is full of people that I will never speak to. And yet I just so badly want a little murmur and a laugh and an applause. It's tiring. And I'm doing a talk, so I should have like a big finale where I solve it. Right? I can step up here and I can tell you this story, and then it's like, well, now I really have it. Here's the real vulnerability. And then I weep for you. It doesn't work that way. And I still believe deeply that there's something about the call to adventure of modern masculinity, the crisis that we are in as men in the world now, which has been going on but is fomenting in our cultural climate. There's a call to adventure that requires vulnerability. And gosh, I can talk a lot about it, but I'm not sure how to model it, and that's what I always thought I was doing. So I took this class. And I had all these great ideas about this masculinity stuff I was going to talk about. And then I wasn't prepared for class, and I showed up and I just spoke. And this is what came out. So what I think I can do to help is not to model vulnerability because I polish it and then it's not quite real. But then also not to like beat myself up for that either, because who cares? But I can talk about why it's hard. And I can just own it and say, I would just really, really like it if you all liked me.